Thanks for tuning in to What's Your Signal, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at how to connect sites, vehicles, IoT, and more in a world that is transforming by the second. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Stefan, who is very excited for Taylor Swift season.
If I have to watch one more football game where half the coverage and the commentators are talking about Taylor Swift, I'm going to throw up in my mouth, I swear.
Well, there is something exciting about the NFL, at least for me, which is this private cellular deal that Verizon has brokered with the NFL, where they're basically providing a private wireless solution across 30 U.S. stadiums, and it gives them these coach-to-coach communications on the field on that secure private network.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, right? Because especially NFL teams, they're always looking for a leg up on the competition or how to get feedback after plays and series on the field as quickly as possible, right? If you go back to old school, they used to have runners that ran pictures from the booth area down to the field during when the offense and the defense would switch, would move from offensive series to defensive series. So they'd take pictures, take video, print them off really quick, old school, have some kid run down like 50 flights of stairs to the coach on the sidelines and deliver those. Now they can instantly just share that from the booth to the field, and the offensive coordinators in the booth can have live conversations with the quarterbacks and the wide receivers on the sidelines, share video back and forward instantly, and wouldn't be able to necessarily accomplish that on a public cellular network or even Wi-Fi in a stadium that's being occupied by 100,000 screaming fans who are trying to post on social media and check box scores from other games or their fantasy football team based on what's going on the field. And so it's really interesting to provide that network, because the public cellular network would just be saturated, right? The network, the infrastructure that's built around the stadium is built for what's normal and customary, not necessarily what's going on, on any given Sunday or during an event in that stadium. And then trying to blanket a stadium with 100,000 people, 150,000 people plus vendors with Wi-Fi just would make the cost of that just untenable, even for the NFL. And so, having a private cellular network that is just dedicated to those mission critical applications, and in this case, it's coaches communication, it's point of sale for restaurants, it's point of sale for merch. So having that private network available to them where they have high speed access with security and low latency just is like a game changer for the services that the stadium can deliver to not just the teams on the field, but the fans in the stadiums, regardless if it's a football game or a concert or any other thing going on in that venue. So I think it's definitely a game changer for how they provide services to everybody in the stadium.
And I can imagine that there are different sizes and shapes of private cellular networks depending on the situation, because frankly, different situations have all these little nuances, right, that they have to accommodate for. And here to help us understand more of what that means is Kimberly Durr and Treven. Kimberly joins us from Cradlepoint, where she's a global engineering specialist for private wireless networks, and Per is bringing his expertise in 5G private networks and more as the Director of Business Development at Ericsson. So private cellular networks are catching on fast. And I saw this article in, I think it was RCR Wireless, that said that the global private cellular market is expected to reach close to 100 billion by 2030, which I can't even comprehend that number, mainly for connectivity in large areas. But I really want to dig into why you guys think private cellular is growing this much. But I want to start with the basics. So what is a private cellular network?
A private cellular network is similar to your network that you're using with your regular phone, but it's something that you manage yourself. And it's often installed on premise. So you have the equipment at your facility, and you put up the radios or access points, and then you control the SIM cards that go into the device. You control whoever is going to be on your network. But from a number of perspectives, it's the same network that you have outside and that you're used to using on your phone, but you control everything around it. You control the data, you control the access, and it's your network to manage.
Yeah, I think I'd add in there, I think a lot of people get confused with maybe APNs on public cellular. But if you think about a cellular network at the basic like Lego level, you have your user equipment, your device with that SIM card goes into, that connects to a radio, and that connects to a core. And with public cellular, that core is, in the premise of the carrier. And here the core can either be in private cellular, that core can either be on premise or, it could be in the cloud, but let's just, to keep it simple, let's just say like you own that SIM card device, you own that radio, and you own the core. And so you own that full data path with private cellular.
Why do people care about that? Like, why does it matter? Why would I use a private cellular network?
Yeah, so I go way back in cellular. So I worked for a carrier for 17 years. And so I started it in 2001. And, I've worked on stuff from big to small. I've worked in stadiums in Los Angeles. I've done stuff as small as like in the middle of rural Kansas, like an E911 dispatcher that only had 5 cell phones and they need coverage. And, as an engineer, you like to solve problems, right? And you're like, okay, I have like these 3 tools in my toolkit and I have all these applications. And sometimes that fits, the tools in the toolkit, but now we have a lot more tools in our toolkit and we can more elegantly solve some of these problems that maybe haven't even been able to move to wireless because they didn't fit that carrier paradigm quite so well. So just to bring it to a real example, so say like a warehouse yard, an outdoor storage yard, where you have, say, gypsum or rocks or something, and you don't make a ton of money on each of those widgets or whatever that you have. You would like to use, IoT to better get your logistics down at that location. But public cellular, maybe it has a coverage problem. Maybe you don't want to pay for your data to go all the way to the core and back, or latency or cost issues from that perspective. And Wi-Fi, it doesn't really do so well outdoors. And so a lot of these places are still on pen and paper, and they just haven't had that right use case that fit the previous toolkit. So I think that it's important that for things like that, where a public cellular, a private cellular can be important because it can bring so many more things to life depending on the application. So if an application didn't kind of fit the previous model, now we've got all these different tools in the toolkit that can help all of these use cases that can come to life now.
What are some of those other use cases? So how are people using private cellular networks in different industries?
So I can go into a bit in terms of the manufacturing, why people invest in private networks in manufacturing specifically. And just to take one step back, when we are looking at 5G specifically, it's 5G was targeting from the beginning enterprise, much more industrial use than actual broad use out in the macro network. So it was already poised to be a tool, like Kimberly was talking about, for enterprise, more than for just regular subscribers. But over the last couple of years, I found a few reasons why manufacturers are investing in private networks. And for some, it's as simple as saying that it's investment in the future technology. They believe that 5G is the right tool for the future. And they are looking at that as being an integral part of their deployment in their in their factory, in their warehouse. They are able to collect data into doing data analytics and those AI type of applications that is very popular to talk about now. We also see some of the challenging use cases where a private network may be more suitable for video, for mobility use cases like AMRs, and also use cases where you need a lot of throughput and low latency. So that is where the private cellular technology comes handy. Also seen some that are more, I guess, in a sense, you're deploying a new network and you're looking at separating different traffic over the different networks. So you may have your IT network already and you keep your corporate traffic on your IT network, but for traffic and control of machines and collecting data from machines, etc., you keep that on your private network. So you're separating the traffic and you're keeping that traffic secure. And lately, we have seen that, though talking about the challenging use cases may be really where the conversation started, but we are seeing more and more that, well, wow, if I just had coverage everywhere in my facility, I could digitalize much more of my work. All my workers would be connected and they would not have trouble to walk around with an electronic device and instead of paper. And it can solve some of those problems also. So right now, perhaps more going back to basics to just make sure that you have this excellent coverage than rather just trying to solve a specific complicated problem.
So, I'm a old school networking guy, right? So I came up Wi-Fi, wired LAN, that kind of stuff. So, we've talked a little bit about like kind of the new parts of the system, right? We've talked about the core and the radios, but let's talk a little bit about the learning curve. Like, what kind of learning curve do you think that IT professionals are going to have to overcome, or is there a good way to relate this to topics that they might know and things that they might know as far as like deploying wireless LAN?
I think that kind of depends on a couple of things. It depends on the product that they choose. There's all sorts of different sizes of private cellular. There's different ways that they can purchase. So I like to, my love language is use cases. So I'll speak through that. So talking to like a healthcare provider, and I find that it doesn't necessarily follow by verticals, but it's kind of the humans, and then also the devices and the different things. So talking to the IT practitioner for a huge healthcare facility, multiple huge hospital, university hospital campuses with say like 150 warehouses or medical clinics. And, they are super proficient in understanding. They already have DAS. They're already really proficient in it, and they want to kind of own it themselves. And so I think a customer like that could potentially take care and manage all on their own, and they'd be super, super happy with that. And we are getting, in AI and machine learning and things along those nature, we're making it easier and easier for that type of user that is used to Wi-Fi. I liken it to like a car, the Teslas. You have a car that we're approaching this auto steer and full self-driving, and there's a lot of different things going on, but anybody can get in and turn it on and drive the thing or have it drive them around even. And it's the AI behind it that's making something so complicated that anybody can manage. So I think that there is room for that where somebody can completely manage it. And then I talked to another hospital practitioner who's kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and I'm sure he could learn it, but he just doesn't want to. He's like, I know my Wi-Fi, I have to kind of account for cellular, but I don't want to get my people up to speed on anything around this. Like, I want somebody else to take care of it. And there's room for that too, because we're making products that can be managed, say, even by an MSP to where they could add value. So they could manage it themselves, and they don't have to completely learn a new language depending on the product. But yeah, there's room for all of the Wi-Fi people, depending on what their appetite for fully managed versus they want to take this on themselves.
Just as a follow-on to that, and I think what Kimberly touched on is great. There are kinds of different models, but I also think that if we're looking at the ecosystem is sort of closing in towards Wi-Fi terminology more, or avoiding a lot of the terminology perhaps that you would use into cellular. So there is a merge, and that makes it easier for somebody who is not necessarily that well versed in the cellular space. But as with everything, new technologies, there's a lot of training available also for the ones who want to learn a lot.
Just to clarify, when people and enterprises are setting up private cellular networks, are they replacing Wi-Fi altogether, or do they use both of them? Do they use both Wi-Fi and private?
Both. I mean, I look at it from this standpoint, like any product that has a big market cap, there's somebody using it and there's a problem it's solving, right? It's the tool in the toolkit analogy again. Like if there's not a lot of people buying VCRs, well, they kind of went away, right? Like nobody's making those, nobody's investing in it. And people are still definitely investing in Wi-Fi. And people are starting to invest in private cellular, and they can live side by side. It's just what problem are you trying to solve? I think Per talked earlier about this OT type space and the factory floors. And when you need reliability, you need to know in a deterministic way, like I'm going to have this much throughput at this location, and I'm going to be able to, take care of my noise floor. It doesn't matter, what's going on in the environment. It's just really predictable. Then that's where private cellular is going to win. And if you have, say, a carpeted space, you need high throughput. You have people connecting on their laptops. If Wi-Fi is working just fine, then they can live together, side by side. Outdoors, I would say I haven't run into anybody that says like, oh, my Wi-Fi is working just great outdoors. And that's where, coverage, like we get coverage and reliability. I think that's where public or private cellular is going to shine. So definitely a coexistence story.
You've shared a lot of these use cases, and I'm just curious, are there minimum and maximum areas for private cellular? Like, is there a space that's maybe too small for private cellular or too big, or is it built to cover all of that?
So maybe I can start with that. I think that there is a bit of economy of scale. And I believe that where you look at different solutions have different purpose. And I think that we have solutions for all sizes. So there is not a real minimum. And I think the good thing about private networks is that there is not really a maximum either. So when you're looking at facilities that are square miles, or you have the indoor areas of millions of square feet, that is where you can deploy a very successful network with great coverage in all those areas. And going back to the carpeted versus non-carpeted area, office area versus industrial area, I think you may find different solutions for different purpose there.
Yeah, I think of out in the middle of, say, California or Texas, and you have like oil fields or wind farms and things like that. You have all these sensors and telemetry, and that may be across a very large area, and there's probably not good cell coverage, or you don't want to get all that telemetry. If you had to pay for a data card for, say, like 5,000 wells or solar, that's a large area, and that's a great use case for private cellular. And then on the flip side, I talked about these, say outdoor storage. I had a location where they had 6 Wi-Fi APs, and they were talking about putting up 2 more, and we put up one cellular access point, and we covered all that they had planned, plus across the road, like across, like, I mean, it was still their location, but I didn't realize that was actually theirs because they hadn't even envisioned that we could cover so far with just one. And, so they didn't have to invest in the extra Wi-Fi and still have dead spots. But also the trenching, it's, if you're trying to cover, if you have fiber, that's fantastic. But what about that extra, that little bit of extra range? And that's where you kind of get into the smallest use cases where you have one cellular access point outdoors that can replace, in that use case, it was maybe 8 to 12 Wi-Fi access points and the cabling nightmare. And then also the sticky Wi-Fi client problem where they would get behind some of their product and their forklifts would lose connectivity or it would be stuck on the wrong Wi-Fi client. And that's where cellular mobility can do well. But even with that, we didn't even need 2 cellular access points or radios. And so we don't have to get stuck. We're just using one, but we could use more. And then the mobility story could come in with better handovers. I think that was that the question? Did I go off topic?
I love it. Yeah, keep going.
Go off free range. Sorry.
So let me ask this, and maybe we can relate it. I think a little bit better for some of the listeners. Why don't maybe starting with Per, what's your favorite or most interesting use case that's been solved out in the field by private cellular to this point?
So most interesting, I don't know if it's the most interesting, but one of the early adopters with private networks was in the mining industry. And the reason why it took off so well there was because you really have the autonomous hauling and remote operation of vehicles. So when you look at the autonomous hauling and you're going pretty much between the same 2 points all the time, and you don't have to have drivers to take that down from the mine up to the port or wherever the drop-off point is of the ore. That is a use case that is paying for itself many times over. And of course, the other one is then in the mining industry, remote control of vehicles and machines. Safety, being above ground, being able to control something deep under. And look at the time savings when you're doing shift change. You can have an hour to get people to get out from under the ground. But if you're above ground, your shift change is easy and you know that everybody is out of harm's way. So I think those are some early adopter use cases which are very intriguing.
Kimberly, do you have a favorite or interesting use case that you've seen deployed?
Yeah. So there's a fun one. We went to like a port and showed them the RF. So I'm an RF nerd as an RF design engineer for over a decade. And so I love showing the heat maps of, okay, this is what we can cover. And they were like, oh my gosh, because what we're trying to do is cover the boats that are in the harbor doing the patrols, and they have a cradle point device on them already. And what we need is connectivity, because then they were like, oh man, we can have like 5 cameras on that. We can do all these other things and the patrols and even the patrol cars going through the harbor. And what I showed them, so I set up the gear, and it was up in less than 3 minutes. So I had connectivity to an HD camera in less than 3 minutes. And then I showed them the heat map, and that was like the 1-2 punch of like, oh my gosh, like the light came on and they're like, we have applications we haven't even thought of yet. We're sure if we can get connectivity out there, because we talked to them about like, well, what are your pain points? And they're like, well, there's public carrier, but it's facing back into land and we don't cover in the water. And we're like, what about sat phones? So like, yeah, our officers, they have sat phones, but they don't really work that well. And I don't know why exactly. But obviously if you're going to be doing video cameras, you might want to do private cellular versus satellite anyway. And it's just cool to think about, to see their eyes light up, to think like, whoa, what else could I do with this?
Kimberly, I'm just going to back up really quick. When you say you're an RF nerd, that means you're a real
Radio
freaking nerd.
frequency.
Oh, that radio freak. Got it. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Radio
Now I-
frequency. Yeah, so that's where I started my my career back in the day as a radio frequency design engineer for a carrier.
So you are also a real freaking nerd.
That's true. Yeah, I can't spell geek without a
Both.
double E. So electrical
There you go.
engineer, double E, geek. Yeah, it's all. Yeah, I was just born very nerdy.
So I have a question about, we've talked a lot about coverage and kind of the expanse of that coverage with private cellular networks. Are there benefits from a security perspective when it comes to private cellular?
Yeah, I can't believe we didn't like harp on that more. So if you come from a Wi-Fi background, you can get that level of security if you do your radius server and a few other things that have other boxes, and you make sure everything is configured properly. Which, as we all know, if you misconfigure something, then that's an entry area for a bad actor, right? So with cellular, it's inherent to the technology. You've got all the 3GPP standards and security, and then you have that SIM card-based security. So you have to have the SIM card or an eSIM for that device to have somebody on the system. So I would say it's easier to have that top level of security with cellular. I don't know, Mauricio, do you have qualms? I know Wi-Fi people might, don't call my Wi-Fi insecure.
No, but I mean, you're absolutely correct, right? With Wi-Fi, you can do 802.1x. You have to have a radius server. You have to have the routes to the radius server. It gets even more complicated if the radius server is maybe centrally located in a office or in the cloud, and ensuring that you have connectivity to the radius server. So yeah, I mean, doing just basic LAN security, not let alone over Wi-Fi, does get a little more complicated because you have to be able to exchange certificates and those kind of things. And I understand like a lot of that security is inherently baked into SIM cards. So, making that private network a little more secure because you have, right, two of the three things, right? Either something I know, something I have, or something that I am. And, the SIM card covers two of those. It's something that I have with something that I know, which is the certificate, right?
Yeah, and the point to that, it can lead to faster deployment of devices. If you know that you're controlling the device with the SIM card and you know that they are secure, the traffic is secure, it can speed up your deployment of new devices.
Yeah, that goes to like the network segregation. So that's another like where Wi-Fi and private cellular can sit next to each other. I hate it. I hate reading about these hospitals or these like small regional medical centers that get hit by cyber attacks. And you just feel so sorry for those IT people and the patients and everybody involved because, these IT people, they don't have the security analysts that like a bank has, right? And so that would be a great case where you can do segmentation. And you could say, okay, Wi-Fi, for guests, and pull in a PCN network, a private cellular network, and you can have that for your critical communications for your staff.
So that's one of those examples where companies are using both Wi-Fi and private cellular. They don't necessarily need to pick one or the other for their LAN solutions.
Right. And think of like an airplane. It's you get on an airplane, you have Wi-Fi. Like, how do you think you're doing that Wi-Fi?
It's a mystery. I don't think
it's
we fully know
I'll,
how we're
I'll
getting the Wi-Fi.
I'll give you a hint. There's a cellular terrestrial backhaul. Unless you're unless you're over an ocean, then it's probably over, a satellite. But if you're over like the continental U.S., that's going to be LTE or LTE or 5G to the plane and the ground. But then it would be ridiculous to be like handing out SIM cards to all the passengers. It's bad enough going to the airport and getting on a plane. Could you imagine having to hand out SIM cards? No, you just use your Wi-Fi device that you already have access to. Like it's synergistic, right? It's not an either or.
I'm still just very impressed when I fly that I'm in a chair in the sky. I mean, it's really
that too.
Yeah, we are
That comes
complaining
so
about it will take 3 hours to fly.
I know.
Right. And
But we're in a chair
amazing.
in the sky. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
I'll try to keep that perspective next time.
No, one other point on the traffic segregation, and it was somebody who was sharing this with me. I thought his point was pretty clear, and he said that for him, 5G provides clean air, meaning that on the Wi-Fi side, it's much polluted in the sense that everybody's trying to access Wi-Fi. You have your device, you bring in devices, you don't know who's carrying different devices with them, and they are trying to access the Wi-Fi network. Whereas then, going back to what we talked about with the SIM cards and controlling the access, now you have the opportunity to control your devices. You can control your bandwidth that you're giving and the priority to different use cases, and that gives you more control.
And there is such a risk of some of those networks being so congested. I mean, as we're talking, I can visualize more about why these private cellular networks are important. I remember reading a story not that long ago about, was it self-driving taxis or something like that, that they all just had stopped because they were near, I might be conflating this, but they were near a large event, and like the network that they were running off of was basically overloaded because there were all these people at like a concert or something that are, you know, on TikTok. And so now these cars can't work because they can't use the network. And so I can definitely see why something like a private cellular network and having that clean air, I love that analogy, Pear, is a huge benefit for enterprises.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited about like public sector. If there's an emergency, so say they go and they pop up a Wi-Fi network. Well, then that security and also that access, you give the Wi-Fi password to somebody, like your captain of the police force, and you give it to the fire captain, and then they give it to whomever, and then they give it to whomever, and then you lost control. You've lost that clean air that Per talked about. And I was just surprised that was even a solution, because it's like, oh, well, we had this SIM-based, and then you can even do, QoS, saying, okay, fire captain, here you go. Like, we'll give you like that top, the cream of the crop. And then if somebody wants to order a pizza, they can get in line and wait. But you have that control and that clean air.
Hey, I wouldn't discount ordering pizza, right? An army moves on its stomach, so
yeah.
you gotta make sure that they're fed.
That is true. So maybe they would get a priority, higher than the TikTokers. There you go.
I think pizza over TikTok is definitely.
There you go.
That's how I prioritize
that, and you can
things.
set that rule. And I guess, Mauricio, you had talked about like the Wi-Fi and learning, and I would be remiss to say, so I'm learning these networking terminologies, and there is a lot of overlap. It's just there's like slight differences, and I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to learn from both sides as kind of the lingo comes together. So,
I'd be curious to hear, Kimberly and Pear, what you see as maybe some advancements or trends or things that we're still watching on the horizon for private cellular. Like, are we seeing everything that it can do already, or what do you think is coming still?
A couple of things that I'm thinking about. One is where we're looking at new functionality in the network. And you're looking at positioning, for instance, being built into the network. You're looking at what we call time-sensitive networks also, where you have a very defined latency for specific use cases that you need that specification for. But one of the other things that I'm thinking about that is very interesting is when you're starting to look at applications maybe that require video to then combination with positioning and video, and you're starting to be able to move functionality that is currently sort of on devices, perhaps you move them up to the network. So you're looking at geofencing, where people can go and where they are not allowed to go. So you can, for instance, stop machinery as you're seeing people go into specific areas, or you can allow that to continue if you have a specific device or some things like that. But I think
if you want to run them over.
Well, you don't want to run them over, but if you are authorized and you can go into that area, then I guess you have signed a waiver form or something. So then you're allowed to go in there. But I think that is where we're looking also at this technology as being an innovation platform. And we're looking at, now you're starting to think, and you're starting to think about new things that you can do. Ooh, I can do this, I can do that. And that's very exciting.
Yeah, these IT people, man. I was talking to one of them talking about that. Like, oh, you not want to run over people. He's like, but what if I want to run over them? I'm like, oh, dark, man. Dark. Anyway, so leaving that topic aside. So I think that there's going to be, so many flavors, just like there's a lot of different things in Wi-Fi. I think that you're going to get, these full stack capabilities, route switch, Wi-Fi, WAN, security. Like, people really in the enterprise, they like that one throat to choke. And so I think that you're going to see these things kind of come out more. And then there's realization of that, the promise of IoT that we've had for a while in the market, but really now, if you think about cellular, the things that we do better than Wi-Fi, so say, battery life improvement, coverage, security, mobility, like I was talking about with these logistics and warehouse storage yards, or the ports, or maybe that healthcare clinic, or a warehouse, things like that, or pop-up facilities. That's another big one that people are like, in 2 months I have to get this facility ready, and it's only going to be there for 2 years. I don't want to pull all this cable. I know it's like, well, you only need 2 cellular radios. And there's just all of these IoT things that, some of it could be paper and pencil today. And once you get that range and reliability, then I think that we're going to see a lot more. I mean, think about in the port, if you can put telemetry on a buoy, nobody's trenching to, get connectivity to that buoy. Kind of hard to do with water. But if you could actually get connectivity, maybe you could even detect, oil leaks sooner, or get whatever telemetry you need. And so I think I agree with Per. It's like, kind of like, it's like, if you build it, they will come, but it's this lockstep, which I love about cellular. It's like, you go out there and you're like, what do you think of this? What would you do with this? And then you come up with applications, and it's like, well, we think we can do this. And they're like, okay, so we build it a little bit closer to that. And it's just this iteration that I think is really fun. It's innovation iteration.
You mentioned that if you build it, it'll come, right? It's like, even the developments in public cellular have led to a lot of innovation, right? Think about Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and DoorDash and all those things that wouldn't exist without the robustness of the cellular network, right? So it's like, what are those next applications that are going to be possible because people can use private cellular and overcome some of those limitations of traditional Wi-Fi in the past, right?
For sure. And I used to go around like 2017, 2018, I used to have a Dreamcast and like talk about the future of 5G and all of those marketing things that we thought. And yeah, Uber and Lyft, those never in there, and that came about because it was there. So it's pretty exciting times.
Yeah, and that is where I think it's very important that the industry is working together with universities and schools. And you see now that it's becoming part of that ecosystem and infrastructure. And a lot of students have time to do a lot of thinking. And by making that part of their day-to-day life or part of a lab setup, that will also drive innovation. And then when they're coming out in the working world, they expect to have that. Oh, why don't you have that? Right? Are you not looking forward with new technology? So they're going to expect to have private networks and this excellent coverage and capabilities in the workplace when they are coming out and become the new workforce.
Well, Per and Kimberly, I think you've given us a really clear picture of how private cellular is being used now and what we have to look forward to. And I love ending on that thought of, if anything, the next generation is going to be expecting it, so we better all get used to it. So Fantastic. We really want to thank you guys for joining us today in this conversation about private cellular and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Ta-ta.
very much. All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Bye.
Mauricio, I have to say this whole time, I'm just like thinking about Iron Man and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening now. Like his lab, it's what all this is.
Well, even beyond the futuristic kind of like what could we build with this, right? Is like it solves real problems today, like real social problems today. Like one of one of like my favorite, most interesting use cases that I've seen for private cellular is like bridging the digital divide, right? Is like a lot of rural schools and low income people don't have access to internet, which is just at this point fundamental to getting by on life, right? How do you apply for a job? How do you apply for benefits? How do you apply for the things that you need? Is mostly over the internet these days. And so a lot of low-income folks, a lot of low-income students don't have that available to them. So a lot of schools, because, traditional public networks, whether they're wired or wireless, are for profit, right? Which means, they're not incentivized necessarily to build out into rural areas or low-income areas. And so schools and municipalities are able to take that onto their own and use private cellular as a way to provide free or low cost internet that levels the playing field for people. So to me, like it's not just about like those futuristic, Iron Man, space travel, low latency, self-driving cars kind of things. It's about even solving, social problems that can be solved in different ways, like having people think about different ways to solve those kind of social problems.
I feel like the sizes and shapes of private cellular are infinite. Like after having this conversation, it's just so much broader than what I imagined. I always just pictured it like in a warehouse, but it's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's almost infinitely flexible, which means that there's infinite possibilities as to what it can enable.
I love that. Well, y'all, be sure to subscribe to What's Your Signal for more insight about connecting people, places, and things with private networks and more from anywhere. To learn more about private cellular networks, visit us at cradlepoint.com.